There is a reason that everyone from the strongest, Satoru Gojo, to the weakest, like Miwa and everyone in between, all use the new Shadow style Simple Domain. The Simple Domain is a technique derived from the new Shadow style, and it has been shown time and time again throughout the entire series of JJK to be a saving grace that keeps some of the most important characters of the Jujutsu Kaisen cast alive when they are needed most. The Simple Domain has had ridiculous feats like blocking a maximum Uzumaki, on top of keeping Yuji, Maki, Miwa, Ino, Choso, and the strongest himself, Gojo, alive. The Simple Domain has kept all of them alive inside of a Malevolent Shrine at some point, which is ridiculous. I mean, look at it this way. The new Shadow Style Simple Domain is a technique that has been used by more people than the Black Flash. But before I delve any deeper, let me be a stereotype and say like, comment, subscribe, etc. Let's properly discuss what a Simple Domain is, right? The new Shadow Style Simple Domain is an anti-domain technique, not a curse technique. The reason I feel the need to make this distinction is the whole gimmick behind the usage of this anti-curse technique is that cursed techniques are a part of you since birth, with some minor exceptions. However, pretty much anyone can learn the Simple Domain. That's why it is used in the mass majority of plot-relevant fights in the entire series. Fighting Sukuna, Simple Domain. Fighting Mahito, Simple Domain. Fighting Kenjaku, Simple Domain. Granted, it may not result in a character defeating their opponent. I mean, in all the examples I just said, all the characters who use a Simple Domain end up dying or disfigured, which goes against the title of the video. However, there are plenty of fights where its anti-domain typing come into effect. The anti-domain effect basically boils down into making a barrier around the user after taking a crouching stance or some other non-determined stance, but the most consistently seen stance we see with the Simple Domain is crouching down and having your arms reach for your sword, or if you don't have one, just towards your hip as if you have a sword. We also see Ui stand and cast a Simple Domain. We see Kusakabe crouch whilst Miwa stands firm. This is because despite the almost facetious title of the Simple Domain, it isn't all that simple, and it varies from user to user most of the time, as it can be customized and experimented with using binding vows. Kusakabe can increase his Simple Domain's range and automatically react to Sukuna slashes, which is ridiculous. Mio's, aka Sumo Guy, his Simple Domain is so customized to the point where it doesn't feel right to class it as a Simple Domain, but it still is. All Simple Domains, when used for their original purpose, do one thing most important of all. They nullify the sure hit effect of a domain expansion. In some cases, however, a domain expansion may be too refined or too powerful, or it'll have such a large range, or it won't have a traditional barrier, or something of that ilk, right? So a Simple Domain won't be able to nullify the sure hit effect for a very long time, but as it is a barrier technique, it will protect the Simple Domain user until the Simple Domain barrier breaks or is stripped away, like we see with Yuki against Kenjaku and with Gojo inside the Malevolent Shrine. It also has an advantage over the other anti-domain techniques we see, like Hollow Wicker Basket and Falling Blossom Emotion. The main advantage Simple Domain has is that once the Simple Domain's barrier is activated, you can retain some mobility and movement whilst the barrier is still active. Whilst with Hollow Wicker Basket, it requires your hand to be clasped together for a bit, and Falling Blossom Emotion requires that you stay still. So that's just kind of trash, to be honest. For Hollow Wicker Basket to be optimal, you kind of need 4 hands like Sukuna, to be honest. But the Simple Domain, however, despite it initially being intended as a purely defensive technique during its conception in the Heian era, the technique being made to protect weaker sorcerers, hence its moniker being the domain for the weak. Over time, it can also be used for offensive purposes, as we see majorly with my main man Kusakabe, the GOAT. He has the ability to use a Simple Domain in an offensive way, using sword techniques derived from the new Shadow style, such as Evening Moon sword drawing, Batou sword drawing, Hazy Moon. However, since Kusakabe's Simple Domain is more of an exception than the rule, let's discuss something else that's important. Who has actually used a Simple Domain? So I'm going to talk about each use of the Simple Domain throughout the entire series in the order they appear. Okay, number 1, first ever usage we see of it is Kasumi Miwa. Miwa attempts to use it offensively first against Yuji and Maki, and she fails horribly in both attempts. They just kind of jump out of the barrier, or in Maki's case, she just kind of throws stuff at her. This is our introduction to the Simple Domain, and as a result, a lot of people's opinions on the technique and the fandom at large are kind of soured because of this, given how useless it seemingly is in this scenario, and it isn't helped by the fact that Miwa herself classes herself as useless, and the only technique she uses is the Simple Domain. It doesn't make the Simple Domain look good. It is a long time until we see it again, and the next time we see it is in the Hidden Inventory arc, the Kuchisake Owner. The Kuchisake Owner uses it against Toji, and she imbues her Simple Domain with a binding vow of non-violence, similar to Higuruma's domain expansion. If you want to know more about the Kuchisake owner, watch this. But to make a long story short, it is kind of interesting as it is the only case of a non-human using a simple domain. Like what we see here isn't the Kuchisake owner's domain expansion. Since it's kind of reminiscent of the smallpox deity, I would understand if some people thought this was the Kuchisake owner's domain expansion, but it is not. It is a simple domain imbued with a binding vow, which is a very important distinction to make. I mean, granted, it's kind of a moot point given how quickly Toji dispatches the curse, but still, it's cool to see a curse use the simple domain. Then we get past the hidden inventory arc and we make it to pre-Shibuya, where we see Mekamaru / Kokichi Muta use the simple domain. Mekamaru uses it against Mahito, and he does so by putting it inside of these needles and kind of shooting them or stabbing them into Mahito directly. He uses this multiple times, attacking Mahito directly as well as protecting himself from Mahito's domain expansion. Mekamaru also learned it through simply seeing Miwa use it, which shows how goated my guy is. Also, this example of the simple domain shows that if the simple domain is used for offensive purposes against Mahito, it can possibly neutralize his idle transfiguration and in turn allow people to damage Mahito. As stated by myself, this of course means Kusakabe solos Mahito, obviously. We all know this, come on. Ui Ui. Now we cut to the earlier parts of the Shibuya incident. Ui Ui uses it in his battle with his sister Mei against the smallpox deity, using it to protect himself from the Shua hit effect of the smallpox deity's domain expansion, buying time for Mei to deal with the curse via her use of Bird Strike to pierce the spirit. Atsuya Kusakabe. My main man uses it on numerous occasions, given the fact that he is more than likely the one to teach it to Miwa as well as the person who teaches it to Yuji, so it makes sense. The first time he uses it, it is against some fodders from Geto's family, or the remnants of them anyway. He cuts 2 fodders down with a new shadow style technique, not much to say. Some people do argue that Kusakabe might have used simple domain as well during Maximum Meteor's impact to protect him and Panda. It's not confirmed nor denied, so we don't know this, but it is interesting to think that Kusakabe, who is in the blast range, as well as all these members of Geto's family, the members of Geto's family were confirmed to have died, we know this. However, Kusakabe and Panda still lived. Panda from probably switching to his other souls. Kusakabe survived, probably due to the use of simple domain. It isn't stated anywhere, but it would make sense if that were the case. Aoi Todo. Let's jump all the way to Shibuya during the fight with Mahito. Well, one of the fights with Mahito, Todo and Yuji's to be more specific. Todo reacts to Mahito's 0.2 domain expansion with his simple domain on instinct, but the domain's Shua hit effect still catches him off guard and he has to cut off his hand. Then we get to the very end of Shibuya and we see Miwa trying to kill Kenjaku with a simple domain and a new shadow style sword technique. Doesn't go well for her, even though it's buffed with a binding vow that she can never swing a sword again. Does nothing. Nothing really happens. There's not much to say on it. Kusakabe again. Whilst, as I said earlier, you could argue he used simple domain off screen to survive Maximum Meteor, but something that is inarguable and not debatable is that we see him protect Miwa from Kenjaku's Maximum Uzumaki with a simple domain. And he takes no damage from it, by the way. Kusakabe appears in front of Miwa, parries the Maximum Uzumaki from Kenjaku, and protects all of Class B. Not much to say here, except Kusakabe is the goat. I mean, look at this. Could you see any other grade 1 doing this? I friggin' doubt it. Cool as hell. Now the simple domain doesn't show up, there's a little bit of a break for a while, and the next time we see it is Rokujushi Mio, aka Sumo Guy. He uses a form of simple domain which is pretty unique. His simple domain creates something akin to an innate domain, wherein which a sumo ring is created and requires his opponent's permission to activate. When activated, Mio and his opponent, the example we see is him using it against Maki, the 2 people inside have all of their binding vows, cast energy, anything Jujutsu related is stripped from them to put them on an equal playing field, and they then in turn engage in 1000 matches of sumo. Kind of similar to the Kuchisake owner's simple domain because it kind of resembles more of an innate domain, but on top of this, the domain's flow of time is altered as we see 1000 rounds of sumo, which would take a long ass time. This occurs within moments outside the domain. The Anti Sukuna squad probably used this to train for Sukuna, but we don't know if they used this hyperbolic sumo ring or not. Tsukumo Yuki, one of the best gals in the series, uses simple domain during a showdown with Kenjaku. I mean, it's stated during the 0.21 domain expansion that Todo was taught the simple domain by Yuki, so she's clearly knowledgeable on the technique. However, when using it against Kenjaku, it was quickly ripped away by Kenjaku's domain expansion. Didn't do much for her here, I won't lie, but hey, she tried, you know? Now, after this, the next time we see it is with Gojo. Satoru Gojo uses it during the Shinjuku Showdown against Sukuna, to everyone's shock. If Gojo could use his technique at any time, why didn't he teach this very useful anti-domain technique to his students? According to Kusakabe, he's such a genius that he just can't. He used it to survive the Malevolent Shrine, and it kinda helped a bit as it allowed Gojo to use RCT whilst inside of Malevolent Shrine. Then he uses a red to destroy MS. Pretty cool. He was able to do this all because of the advantage provided from learning the simple domain. Kusakabe, again, we skip a big chunk of the story all the way up to when Sukuna faces off against the Anti Sukuna squad. Kusakabe uses his simple domain firstly to protect Higuruma, then again later uses his simple domain as well as other numerous facets of the new Shadow style to attack Sukuna in his 1v1 with the King of Curses, blocking Sukuna slashes that don't even have a hand motion, just because Kusakabe's simple domain is pretty much just Nobunaga's N from Hunter x Hunter. But as I said, Kusakabe's simple domain is rather unique, so I won't go into too much depth. Yuji, Choso, Ino, and Miwa, the latest additions to the simple domain army. After spending time inside of Kusakabe, Yuji learns how to use a simple domain. Maybe Choso and Ino did as well, but we don't know. They all use it to survive inside this newer version of Malevolent Shrine, which is pretty neat. There's Ino using a simple domain as well as Miwa to protect Maki, and I guess Choso has a simple domain as well, which is pretty cool. Shortly after this, everyone is saved from the Malevolent Shrine via the new and improved Boogie Woogie, as explained here, but as of this point, these are all the versions of the simple domain that we have seen so far. So, to refer back to the title of this video, how has it saved the series so far? Almost every use I've mentioned here has helped the plot move forward in some way or another, with exception of like the Kuchisake owners and Miwa's first uses of the technique, but that's about it. Maybe also arguably Yuki's isn't the best either. Gojo's use of simple domain allows him to heal and then destroy the Malevolent Shrine during one of the earlier domain clashes. If he didn't use simple domain at that point, then the damage Sukuna takes is negligible, meaning Kashimo doesn't even force Sukuna into his four-armed form, meaning Kashimo's life meant even less and makes it significantly less likely that they take down Sukuna. Yuji surviving with simple domain, first of all, keeps him alive and allows him and Todo to beat Sukuna till Yuta arrives in Gojo's body. Granted, if we look at Yuta's sacrifice to become a monster, it doesn't really amount to much, but you could at least make the argument that it allowed Yuji to heal outside of the domain clash, and if we just take the fact that it kept Yuji alive, it allowed him to land another Black Flash on Sukuna, which in turn unlocks his domain expansion, winning the war against Sukuna, meaning that if Yuji didn't have simple domain here, the series would have ended. Yuki's use of it allows it to get close enough to Kenjaku for him to let down his guard and jump Kenjaku with Choso's aid. Granted, to be honest, this is one of the lesser uses of simple domain, if I'm honest, just because Yuki's kind of a jobber, in my opinion, but that's a topic yet again for another day. Kusakabe's use of the technique keeps all of Class B alive, as well as Higuruma. Even if Miwa died during the maximum Uzumaki from Kenjaku, it means Maki would have needed someone else who wielded a simple domain to save her during the Malevolent Shrine that caught Ino, Yuji, Choso, and herself inside. Without Miwa, Maki is kinda screwed here. Even Ui's use of the technique allows Mei and himself to survive the Smallpox deity's domain. If Ui didn't have a simple domain then, the crows can't be used to help with Boogie Woogie, Ui can't assist on the battlefield with Sukuna, resulting in him not being able to retrieve Gojo's corpse, and in turn Yuta can't return in his body, etc. Simple domains have something of a butterfly effect in the majority of cases due to how its mechanics work. The ability to consistently defend oneself from someone's strongest abilities is very potent, and as a result has kept almost the entire cast alive at one point or another. I mean, even if we look at Mio's use, if he didn't have hundreds of rounds of sumo with Maki, now you would have probably destroyed all of them. Like, he was doing just fine against Maki and Kamo, and granted Daido could damage him, but still, without Maki's awakening, it could have been a significantly more difficult to fight. It would have been a significantly more difficult battle, to say the least. Overall, the simple domain feels like one of those aspects of Jujutsu Kaisen that is completely overlooked by the JJK fandom at large, despite almost being a consistent aspect of the power system that helps push the narrative forward. It's dope, and I hope you think so too. But with that being said, toodles my doodles, hopefully see you in the next one. Peace.